Hi, I'm Eunice. I used to think the worst thing my family ever did was forget to mention me. At birthdays, in photos, in introductions. But it turns out, what they did was worse than forgetting. They rewrote me, cropped me out, stamped someone else's name on my work, then laughed about it, on livestream. They told people I was a ghost. And when I finally stood up, they didn't apologize. They asked if I'd gone too far. But what happens when the one they've ignored is the one who kept them safe? Would you stay silent too? I showed up in navy. Not black, not floral, not sparkle. Navy, conservative, precise, forgettable. Which, as it turned out, was exactly what they wanted me to be. No one looked up when I entered the reception hall. Not even my mother. She was already locked into a conversation at the gift table, arms gesturing toward the champagne display, praising the lighting or the linens, or whatever part of the setup Raelle hadn't actually done herself. I stood there for 2 full minutes. I counted them. And then a cousin I hadn't seen in 10 years gave me a sideways glance and asked if I was with the waitstaff. I found the card with my name on it, tucked between the utensils. My seat? Back left corner, 3 tables from the kitchen doors, next to the restroom sign. The kind of table you'd use for overflow guests you had to invite, but hoped would leave early. I didn't make a scene. I've never made a scene. Instead, I sat down, pulled my chair in quietly, and folded my napkin across my lap. The smell of disinfectant from the hallway wafted in every few minutes. 2 servers used the path beside me as their shortcut to the ice bins. One apologized once. The other didn't see me at all. I used to sit near the cake table. I remember being 7 and getting scolded for sneaking icing with my fingers. Now, apparently, I belonged closer to the mop bucket. I let it sit. I let it settle. The distance, the choice, the clarity. From across the room, applause broke out as Raelle and her husband entered under string lights. Her dress shimmered like water. People gasped. Someone cried. All of it was very Pinterest. She did look beautiful. I'll give her that. My father rose for the opening toast. To my little girl, he began, raising his glass with a tenderness I hadn't heard in his voice in years. The speech was short, practiced. He praised her job, her grit, her commitment to family. There was a nod to her husband's parents, a thank you to out-of-town guests. But my name? Not a single syllable. He looked directly at my table once. Maybe. Hard to tell. But if he saw me, it didn't register. I might have been just another +1 from someone's side of the aisle. Not that I expected a spotlight. I'm not the kind of woman who requires one. But silence. Deliberate silence? That's a language I've learned to translate. Every omission was strategic. Every non-invitation to take a photo. Every sentence that skipped over where I came from or who I was. It was curated. I didn't travel down for recognition, but I noticed its absence all the same. Later, when the formalities kicked off, the DJ introduced the bridal party. One by one, names were cheered. Cheers turned into whistles, whistles into toasts. Raelle took the mic like she'd done it 100 times. She had presence. That I never denied. She smiled at her husband, then at the guests, and somewhere in the middle of thanking their mentors and sharing inside jokes with her sorority sisters, she paused and said, "You know, I've learned that some people live lives so quiet, it's like they never existed at all." The room laughed. A full-body laugh. Heads leaned into shoulders, hands clutched pearls. I didn't move. Not even when my mother clapped. Not even when my father leaned toward her and nodded like it was the best line of the night. My jaw didn't tighten. My stomach didn't drop. Instead, something inside me shifted. Subtly. Like a drawer being quietly closed for the last time. That was the moment something inside me didn't break. It evacuated. My glass was half full, untouched. I kept one hand on its stem. The other rested on my lap, fingers curled. The music came back on. A string quartet cover of something pop. My name still hadn't been spoken. I stayed in my seat, unbothered on the outside, still, measured. But inside, I was taking stock. Not of what I'd lost, but what I'd been told. Plain and clear. I wasn't here to prove anything. but maybe I should have been. She lifted her phone, checked the alert flashing silently. Clearance code 6.14. Authority required. I slipped the phone back into my clutch without anyone noticing. The music had shifted again, this time to something with violins trying too hard to sound like top 40. I waited for a moment, then rose from my seat with the kind of casual purpose I've mastered over the years. People don't ask questions if you look like you're going to do something important. Outside, the air felt thicker than it should have been for late spring. I leaned against one of the stone pillars lining the back patio and unlocked my phone. The message blinked back at me, level 6. Time sensitive. Direct clearance request. It wasn't unusual for my work to follow me, but it hadn't chased me down in the middle of my sister's wedding before. I verified my identity, listened to the secure voice file. Review requested for countermeasure chain, CLC 7144. Status, pending final oversight. DC confirms you're still the point. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I tapped once to acknowledge and slid the phone shut. When I returned to my seat, the projector screen had been lowered. Guests were finishing dessert, a few wandering off to refill wine. Reilly's friend group was already congregating near the dance floor, arms around each other like they were pledging again. I sat down quietly. And as the slideshow started, I already knew what wasn't coming. Photos flashed. Rael's first birthday, Rael in a tutu, Rael on her first bike, with my father crouching behind her. More Rael. Middle school, prom, her internship at the marketing firm where she met her fiancé. I counted 6 different hairstyles, 4 boyfriends, and at least 3 Christmases I clearly remembered being at, but wasn't in a single frame. There was even a photo from our family trip to Savannah. We'd all gone, my parents, Rael, her high school boyfriend, and me. I remembered because I was the one who'd driven the rental car. The picture they used? Cropped just enough to remove the arm that had held the camera. My arm. It wasn't a mistake. It was surgical. I didn't blink. I didn't shift in my seat. I watched the whole thing with a calm I didn't entirely trust. When it ended, the room clapped lightly, polite nostalgia. Someone nearby wiped a tear. I just reached for my glass. "Did you not come on these trips?" a woman asked from the next table. She looked vaguely familiar, one of my mother's friends maybe. "I was probably holding the camera," I said, keeping my voice even. She smiled. "Oh, how thoughtful." I nodded once and turned back toward the empty stage. It's a strange feeling, realizing you're being erased in real time. Not vilified, not argued with, just omitted, like a name scratched off a guest list no one checks twice. And it wasn't the first time, either. This was just the most curated version of it. From the corner of my eye, I saw Real watching me. Not directly, she was too polished for that, but her glance lingered longer than it needed to, like she wanted to see if I would do what I've always done. Stay quiet. I didn't give her the satisfaction of breaking character. Not yet. Instead, I asked the server for water, nodded my thanks, and looked toward the dance floor where the next wave of photos had begun cycling on repeat. It was all smiles, high heels, and new beginnings. No trace of me, like I'd never existed. But the truth was, I'd spent years making myself small, so no one else had to feel uncomfortable around my presence. I folded corners of myself until I fit into rooms built for smaller people. Tonight, though, something cracked. Not loud, not visible, just enough. I stepped away again, this time to the side garden path near the valet stand. No one followed. I pulled out my phone, checked the message log again, and sent a short line of protocol notes for the CLC project. No emotion, just clarity. By the time I walked back in, they were clearing plates. Someone had opened the side doors to let the night air drift through the hall. The scent of lavender from the centerpieces mixed with the faint bite of white wine. I sat back down in the same chair next to the restroom. Same room, same table, same silence. But I wasn't the same. My posture changed. My hands rested differently on the table. My breathing slowed, and my focus narrowed. I've spent years not correcting people's assumptions. I let them believe whatever they needed to believe so they could be comfortable. But maybe it was time they started feeling what it was like to be uncomfortable. Someone had adjusted the lighting. Softer now, dimmer. The candles at each table glowed a little warmer, casting the room in the kind of haze people call romantic when they're too polite to admit it feels staged. Plates were cleared, champagne topped off. The wedding had officially entered its second act. I leaned back slightly, letting the room move around me. I had no intention of dancing. I wasn't going to drift from table to table like the other guests, rehearsing compliments or pretending I cared who had baked the lemon bars. But then I heard her voice. "That one?" someone asked, 2 tables over. "Next to the door?" I didn't need to turn to know who they were pointing at. My mother answered, too brightly. "Oh, she's the older one. Doesn't live here anymore. She's in... what is it again? Something with security? Computers?" The woman nodded, clearly not invested. The conversation moved on. I kept my eyes down, tracing the rim of my glass with one finger. I used to think the worst thing my parents could do was disapprove of me. But I was wrong. Disapproval still acknowledged your existence. What cut deeper was indifference, the kind that reshapes you into a vague outline of a person, one you recognize, but they clearly don't. Someone took the seat beside me. I didn't look right away. The cologne hit first, familiar. "Didn't think I'd be seated with royalty," a voice said, dry, amused, soft-spoken. Miles. My back stiffened, but I didn't move. I took another sip from my glass before finally meeting his eyes. "You clean up well," he added. "I always did," I said flatly. We hadn't spoken in almost 3 years. Not since I ended things. He wanted more openness. I wanted space. He asked too many questions I couldn't answer without violating every security oath I'd ever signed. I hadn't expected to see him here. But Riel. She knew. She always knew. She'd placed him here for a reason. She didn't throw punches. She threw people. "I'm surprised you came," I said. "My mother insisted," he replied, offering a small shrug. "She still thinks your family walks on water." "Then she's clearly only seen the highlight reel." We sat in silence for a moment. Around us, people laughed easily, clinking glasses, gossiping about honeymoons and house renovations. I imagined this was what exile felt like. Not banishment, but being made to watch everyone else pretend you were never part of the picture. Across the room, one of the groomsmen leaned into another. "That's her?" he whispered. "The sister nobody talks about? I thought she was in prison or something." The other laughed, not bothering to lower his voice. "Nah, man. I heard she lives in a trailer in Tennessee, has like 12 cats, and runs a conspiracy blog." Miles glanced over, startled. "Seriously?" I didn't respond. "You're not going to say anything?" he asked. "What would I say? That I'm not a recluse who yells into a webcam from the woods? That I actually designed cyber infrastructure for people who wear suits they didn't rent?" His brow furrowed. "Why do they say it then?" "Because it's easier than telling the truth, that I outgrew them, that I chose something they can't brag about at garden parties." He looked away, visibly uncomfortable. I didn't flinch. The truth is, I'd stopped expecting people to understand me a long time ago, especially ones who'd rather trade proximity for peace. "The urge to explain yourself dies," I said quietly, "when you realize no one's ever been listening. Not really." He exhaled and looked like he wanted to say something, but the moment had already cooled past saving. The music shifted again. Another cover of a pop song masked in violins. Another reminder that nothing tonight was what it appeared to be. After a few minutes, he cleared his throat. "You don't even look upset," he said. "I'm not." He tilted his head. "Not even a little?" "No, but I'm done." There was a time I would have tried to clarify, soften, give him something to hold on to. But not anymore. That part of me, the part that twisted myself into something softer to make others feel comfortable, That part had been set down. Sometimes you don't burn a bridge, I told him, standing slowly, my napkin folded neatly and placed on the table. You just stop caring if they ever cross it again. And I meant it. I walked toward the side exit, not rushing, not hesitant, just done. My steps had a rhythm to them now, a beat I didn't borrow from anyone else. That's when I felt it. A touch, not firm, but practiced. My mother's hand curled around my forearm like she was smoothing a wrinkle that didn't exist. "Don't ruin your sister's day," she said, lips barely parting. The smile stayed glued to her face for the benefit of whoever might be watching. She adjusted my shawl like a choreographed movement from a Southern etiquette book, then leaned in just close enough to be heard. "You know how you can get, this isn't the time." I didn't pull away. I just let the chill of her voice settle against my skin like perfume I hadn't chosen to wear. "I know you take things personally," she added, "but this isn't about you. It always amazes me how some people can smile while driving a knife between your ribs, and how they still expect you to thank them for the reminder." She held my gaze for a moment longer before returning to the table where Reel sat, laughing in perfect pitch with the bridesmaids. If they noticed my absence, or her warning, they didn't show it. I continued out to the corridor, finding a pocket of quiet just off the main hall. A waiter passed with a tray of shrimp skewers. I nodded politely, but didn't take one. Inside, the DJ had transitioned to a classic swing track, the kind older guests would politely bob to before slipping out for the night. The rest of us, we were expected to linger, toast again, and act like this celebration had healed every ugly thing that had ever been said inside the house I grew up in. I walked back inside slowly, keeping to the edges. That's when she found me, small, maybe 7, hair in soft curls, and a dress with too many layers of tulle for her comfort. She held a sugar cookie like it was a rare artifact. "Hi," she said. "Are you the sister nobody talks about?" I froze. Not from shock, but from the surgical precision of it. I crouched slightly to meet her eye. "Excuse me?" "That's what Aunt Carol said. She said there's a sister nobody talks about anymore, and you were probably her." There was no malice in her tone, just curiosity. Before I could speak, she added, "I like your dress, though. You look like a boss." I managed a smile. "Thank you." Then she ran off, bouncing, unbothered, humming something out of tune. That's the thing about kids. They don't filter what they hear. They just repeat it, which means whatever I've become in this family's lore has now passed into a kind of bedtime myth. I wasn't just being talked around. I'd been rewritten. I stepped aside as a small group moved past me toward the bar. A few nodded politely. Most didn't recognize me. As I made my way back toward my table, an older woman I didn't know stopped me near the coat check. She looked like she might have been the groom's aunt. Pearl necklace, polite perfume, the kind of woman who calls everyone dear and never runs out of comment cards. "You're the other sister, yes?" "I suppose so. I remember your mother saying you were overseas for something top secret. Is that right? She said you didn't really do family things." I nodded once. "That's not inaccurate, it's just incomplete." She smiled like she didn't know what to say next, but didn't want to look rude. "Well, it's nice you could be here tonight. I'm sure it means a lot to Rael." "Does it?" I didn't say it aloud. I just nodded again, thanked her, and moved on. I wasn't upset, not anymore. But that didn't mean I wasn't done collecting these moments like beads on a string. I reached the far end of the ballroom, where the glass doors opened onto the courtyard. I paused there for a breath, not really knowing what I was waiting for. Through the window, I could see my sister, framed by golden light and surrounded by people who adored the version of her that they'd been handed. She leaned in to say something to our mother. They both looked toward the door where I stood. Not once did they wave me over. And I knew, in that instant, that I was no longer just the outlier. I was the one they needed out of frame to make the whole picture cleaner. There's a moment in every woman's life where silence stops being grace, where holding your tongue doesn't mean you're wise. It means you've given the floor to someone who doesn't deserve the mic. For me, that moment had come and gone. This wasn't about keeping the peace anymore. This was about deciding which version of me I'd carry out of this room. There's a point where silence stops being restraint and becomes survival. I didn't head straight for the exit. Instead, I followed the perimeter of the room, past the dessert table where people hovered over miniature tarts like they were choosing jewelry, past the photo booth where drunk uncles and bored teenagers posed with boas and plastic crowns. Then I heard it. A measured voice behind me. Calm, low, unmistakably authoritative. "Permission to approach, ma'am?" I turned. The man standing in front of me wore a navy suit, clean-cut, not overdressed. But there was weight behind the way he stood. Not military, not formal security. Agency, mine. A few nearby guests went quiet. The word he used, ma'am, wasn't Southern courtesy. It was protocol. It turned heads, shifted air. The man dipped his chin just slightly. "We need your confirmation on the Aegis Chain Response Protocol. Signature request is active. Priority level 6. I held his gaze for a second. "Understood," I said quietly. "Tell operations I'll review it in the next hour." He gave a subtle nod and backed away. The people closest to me looked confused. Someone whispered, "Who is she?" Someone else answered, "I thought she was just the sister, the quiet one." But that word, ma'am, echoed. And for once, it wasn't followed by, "Can you pass the butter?" or "You're in my seat." It made them pause. And in that pause, something rearranged. I didn't need to announce myself. That had never been my style. But I wasn't going to sit in the shadows and let them write my story in vanishing ink either. I turned back toward the main floor. And that's when I saw her. Darla Kernan, Riley's boss, standing by the open bar, wine in hand, talking to the head of HR like she was coaching a boardroom pitch. She caught sight of me and blinked. Then she walked over. Her heels didn't click. She glided. "Agent Haviland," she said smoothly, extending a hand. "I didn't realize you'd be here tonight, in person." Her voice held no mockery, just clarity. "I'm off the radar unless I need to be," I replied, shaking her hand. "Tonight was a judgment call." She smiled. "It was the right one." The guests closest to us started whispering faster now. Rael stood frozen a few feet away, wine glass halfway to her lips, unsure if she should smile or bolt. Darla glanced toward her, then looked back at me. "We've got your white paper on infrastructure vulnerabilities posted in 4 departments. Procurement quotes it directly now. Your name? It comes up more than you'd think." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. But I could feel it in the room. Eyes shifting, postures adjusting, like someone had just redrawn the map and no one had a compass. A ripple passed across the family tables. My father leaned forward, confused. My mother gripped her purse like it might fall apart. Darla turned to the MC, who was fiddling with the speaker playlist. "Excuse me," she said, calmly but firmly. "You might want to acknowledge her. You've got one of the highest-ranking analysts in the room sitting next to the kitchen door." The MC froze. Darla looked back at me. "Honestly," she added, "I expected better seating." I offered a dry smile. "They put me exactly where they wanted me." She tilted her head slightly. "Then they should be afraid of what happens next." The MC said something awkward into the microphone about guests of note, but I wasn't paying attention anymore. I didn't need a correction. Not from him, not from anyone. A few people had pulled out their phones, likely Googling my name. Maybe they'd find the declassified hearing transcript. Maybe they'd stumble on the redacted interview. Maybe they wouldn't find anything at all. But they'd wonder. And for once, wondering was enough. Darla gestured to a quiet corner near the vendor door. "If you're still available after the dance set, I'd love to walk you through some back-end rollout issues. Just 20 minutes. I nodded. "Of course." She extended her hand again, just briefly, before disappearing back into the crowd. Someone offered me the mic. I declined without hesitation. I didn't need to correct the record. The record corrected itself. I took the long route around the outer hallway, letting the buzz of whispers fade behind me. The reception was beginning to shift into the next phase. Shoes kicked off, jackets unbuttoned, a second wind of wine and bad decisions. But I wasn't headed for the bar or the dance floor. I wasn't there to toast anything. By the time I stepped into the corridor behind the vendor doors, the air felt cooler, quieter. I could hear someone humming faintly from the staff prep area. A floral arrangement was starting to wilt on a forgotten side table. Rilla was already waiting. She had swapped her heels for flats and her champagne for water. No bridesmaids in sight now. No photographer, just her and me. The light above her buzzed softly. "I didn't expect you to come," she said without looking at me. "That's clear," I answered. She turned toward me slowly, like she was deciding which mask to put on. "Look, I didn't mean anything by the toast. You know how I joke." I let the moment hang before answering. Then I pulled out my phone. With a few swipes, I found the screenshot and turned the screen to her. It was a newsletter, her company's internal communication, announcing the Innovation Leadership Initiative led by her department. My resume had been copy-pasted almost word for word into the spotlighted section, except my name had been removed. Her name was on it instead. "You didn't borrow my light," I said calmly. "You forged a sun out of my credentials and hoped no one would trace the burn." Her smile faltered. That's not what happened. Marketing must have..." I interrupted. "Mixed it up?" "Sure. Funny how they always mix it up in your favor." She didn't reply. From my bag, I pulled out the wedding program and handed it to her. "Go ahead, read it." She scanned it quickly, her brow tightening. Next to my name, "Consulting Editor, Freelance." Not my actual title, not even in the right universe of accuracy. I waited. "You edited me out of my own life," I said softly, "and then replaced me with something digestible, something small." "I didn't write that," she replied quickly. "Mom handled the programs." I tilted my head. "Sure, but you let it print, and you let them hand it out, because it made your version of me easier to explain." She started to speak again, but stopped, then tried another tactic. "Why do you even care? You've always acted like none of this matters. What they say, what they call you." "I care when people build their story on pieces they stole from mine." Her shoulders dropped just a fraction. She reached for another argument. "You could have had this too, you know, a husband, friends, a party like this. You chose to disappear." "No," I corrected. "I chose to matter in silence. That frightens you more than anything, doesn't it?" Her jaw clenched. "You keep accusing me of hiding," I added. "But the truth is, you're terrified of what people might see if I stopped holding you up." She opened her mouth again, but this time nothing came out. A bridesmaid passed behind us, catching just enough of the tension to pause. Her eyes flicked from Rael to me, then back. She didn't say anything, but she didn't smile either. And then she kept walking. Rael stepped back, like she wanted to end the conversation, but didn't know how. Her hand reached instinctively for the water glass on a small table behind her, but it was empty. I took a step forward. Not close, just enough to make sure I wouldn't have to raise my voice. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," I said clearly. "It's the last time my work will carry your name." I left her standing there. The lights inside had dimmed further. Music swelled as the DJ called everyone to the floor for the first big group dance. I kept to the shadows, sliding past guests, too distracted to notice me. But just before I reached my table again, my phone vibrated. A notification popped up from social media. Live stream, Uriel Voss. Some people can't take a joke. I didn't rush back to my seat. I moved slowly, deliberately, letting the pulse in my chest settle and the weight of what had just been said dissolve in the half-dark. My eyes stayed ahead, but my hand stayed close to my phone. There was a kind of tremor in the air I'd felt before, just before a bad storm hits, but hasn't yet cracked the sky. By the time I slid into my chair again, the bass line of the dance track had taken over the room. Laughter floated above it, punctuated by clinking glasses and flashes from the photo booth. I almost made it a full 30 seconds before it came. Buzz. Then another. I glanced down. Live video. Streaming now. Captioned clearly for all the world to see. Riel Voss. Some people can't take a joke. I tapped it open. The frame caught her holding a champagne flute, lipstick smudged, but confidence intact. Bridesmaids leaned into her from both sides, one of them already too drunk to whisper. Rael laughed into the lens. Honestly, if you can't laugh at yourself, you're not living. A voice off-screen added, Does she even, have a job? Another laughed. I thought she freelanced for Pinterest. The comments rolled in faster than the words. That her sister? Why's she always look so mad? Freelance means unemployed. And then, y'all are savage. I'm here for it. I didn't flinch. But I did put the phone down. They hadn't just mocked me. They'd crowdsourced the humiliation. Someone at the table next to me leaned over, oblivious. So, he said, squinting at his wine, what is it you actually do? I thought I heard someone say you were a blogger or something. I looked at him for half a second, just long enough to weigh the kindness of silence against the clarity of fact. Then I picked up the wedding program and slid it across the table. His eyes dropped to the line beside my name. Eunice Haviland, freelance editor and creative coach. When he looked back at me, I didn't offer an explanation. I opened my phone again, found my professional profile from the agency website, one of the few pieces of me not buried behind classified layers, and passed it to him. He stared for a second too long. His lips parted. Then he swallowed, nodded once, and quietly returned the program to the table. That was enough. The truth doesn't always need a megaphone. Sometimes it just needs an audience that finally bothers to read. And that's when I saw her. Darla, moving toward me through the crowd like a ship cutting through fog. She wasn't smiling. Her heels clicked against the floor with the confidence of someone who's seen enough of life to know which voices matter and which don't. She stopped beside me, lowered her voice. That live stream? She said. Not cute. I looked up. She's been claiming work she didn't do, including yours. I'm aware. I didn't know until tonight, but I do now. I nodded. I'd like documentation, she added. Email, screenshots, anything you're comfortable providing. We don't protect liars. You'll have it before I leave Charlotte, I said. Darla pressed her lips together in a way that read as approval. Good, because we take security seriously, and reputation even more. She disappeared back into the shadows of the room just as quickly as she'd come. I exhaled. Not relief, not tension. Just a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. Across the room, Riel sauntered past. The walk wasn't natural. She was trying too hard not to look at me, but also making sure I noticed her trying not to. I kept my eyes forward. She slowed just a little beside my table, her shoulders back, glass still in hand. I didn't look up. Instead, I opened a new message on my phone. To Darla Kernan, subject. Attribution, see attached. Internal deck listing, leadership initiative content. Slide 14 and 16 contain full text from my original proposal, submitted via agency portal May 11, 2023. Attributed to R. Voss, authored by E. Haviland. I hit send. Then I folded my napkin again. Some things only happen once. But if they do, and you let them pass unchallenged, they become tradition. Tonight was the last time. The next morning, the weather did the one thing it hadn't done all weekend. It cooled. Not cold, just enough to peel the humidity from the air. I drove to my parents' house in silence, the radio off, the windows down. My overnight bag was still in the back seat, untouched. I hadn't planned to go, but the text from my mother was short. Brunch. Family only. I parked behind Rilla's new husband's truck. I could hear laughter inside, my father's voice rising in that forced way he used when he wasn't sure who held the room. I paused on the porch, then let myself in. It was just the four of them, my parents, Rael, and him. They had already eaten. My mother was still holding a half-full coffee mug and a cloth napkin in her lap. The tension was wearing perfume, light but clinging. My father stood when I entered, but only halfway. "I was going to call you," he said. Then he cleared his throat, like it was my job to make him feel comfortable. I sat down at the end of the table without a word. The chair wobbled slightly. He exhaled. "Listen, I'm not saying you were wrong. Did you have to do all that? You know how your sister is. She's impulsive. She gets carried away." I folded my hands on the table, looked him square in the eye. "You mean, did I have to respond to her public theft of my work?" He glanced at my mother, then back at me. "I don't really understand what it is you do exactly, but surely it didn't have to go that far." That sentence, that tone, that shrug of accountability wrapped in concern. It could have been from any year between now and when I was 18. "I work in a field where silence protects systems, data, and people's lives," I said. "But in this house, silence just protects the ones doing damage." He didn't have a reply for that. Before anyone could speak again, the doorbell rang. My mother stood to answer it, but someone had already opened it. Darla. She stepped into the room like she belonged there, which in that moment she did. She carried a black folder, thin and clean. She handed it to my father. "I thought you should know what your daughter prevented," she said simply. Then to my mother, "I won't stay." My father opened the folder slowly. Inside was the redacted report on CLC 714, the cyber attack I'd intercepted. Names, timestamps, chain of command, the kind of breach that gets entire divisions shut down when mishandled. Darla waited. Had she not flagged it, your daughter, Rael's entire division, would have been swept into a blackout. $2.4 million gone in 2 hours. Contracts canceled. Lives affected. It would have made national press. Quietly, she prevented all of that. The room dropped 5 degrees. Darla turned to me. "I'll see you back in D.C. I nodded. She didn't acknowledge Rael, who hadn't said a word since I entered. She didn't have to. When the door clicked shut behind her, no one moved. Then my father cleared his throat again. "You know," he said softly, "maybe we didn't give you enough credit." I looked at him. Really looked. "No," I said. "You gave me exactly the amount you meant to. You chose to believe less. It made Rel easier to admire." Rel's chair shifted slightly, but still she said nothing. Her new husband looked at his lap, probably wondering how fast they could leave without causing a scene. "I used to think," I said, "that you'd catch up, that one day you'd turn around and see me. But I realize now, none of you were ever trying to follow." My mother's eyes watered. But whether it was guilt or just discomfort, I didn't care enough to find out. I stood and reached for my coat draped over the back of the chair. "I'll have someone pick up the rest of my things," I said evenly. As I moved toward the door, my mother followed a few steps behind. "You're still our daughter," she whispered, "no matter what." I paused at the doorway. "Yes," I said, but I had to raise myself to become someone I could respect. I didn't wait for a reply. I stepped out into the cool air, letting the screen door hiss shut behind me. The sound didn't slam, but it did settle. Some bridges don't need to be burned. They were never built to hold your weight in the first place. I didn't drive straight home after leaving my parents' house. I stopped at a gas station, bought a black coffee I didn't need, and sat in the driver's seat for a while with the engine off. The early light cut through the windshield at an angle that made everything look quieter than it really was. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. But I was. Finally, settled. 6 months later, I walked onto a stage with a name tag that said everything they used to skip. The room wasn't enormous, but it was precise. Government contractors, senior leadership, flags positioned with surgical symmetry. The moderator stood at a podium and read my title carefully, without rushing. Please welcome Supervising Agent Eunice Haviland, lead author of the CLC 714 Containment Protocol. The applause didn't thunder, but it didn't need to. It was the kind that comes from people who know what it took to get there. I stepped up, glanced over the crowd, rows of neutral suits, quiet pens, and well-placed security. No parents, no sister. And for once, that didn't sting. You don't realize how heavy your name is until someone says it with both syllables and respect. I spoke clearly, only facts, only what needed to be said. My hands didn't shake, and when the panel closed, I didn't rush off stage. I stayed to answer questions, shake hands, nod. Darla caught my eye from the second row and mouthed, "Well done!" Later, backstage, she pulled me into a brief hug that felt less like celebration and more like confirmation. "You're still the best mind I've worked with," she said. We didn't dwell on Rael, but Darla offered one small update anyway. She left the company. New town, no LinkedIn, quiet online, might be figuring out who she is without standing on someone else's shoulders. I didn't ask for more. I didn't need it. That night, back in my DC condo, I poured a single glass of wine, opened the patio door, and let the hum of the city fill the space where silence used to gnaw. Miles had texted earlier in the day. "I watched your keynote. I get it now." I didn't reply. Not because I was bitter, but because I was done explaining myself to people who only listened when the lights were brightest. The framed document on my wall caught the light as I passed it. An ordinary-looking memo, one page, printed in grayscale. No gold seal, no bolded heading. Just the first classified alert I ever submitted. 12 years ago, signed, dated, filed away and forgotten by everyone who ever claimed to know me. I had it framed not because it mattered to them, but because it reminded me that it happened, even when no one applauded, even when no one came. I sat at the kitchen table and ate pasta I'd made the night before. Candle lit, not for romance, but for rhythm. I had enough food, enough light, enough quiet. I had myself. They say wounds heal with time, but no one talks about the ones that leave you better, not softer. Wiser, not smaller. I've learned that not every scar should fade. Some are meant to be kept, to remind you of what you survived, of who you had to become when no one else showed up. When I finished my glass, I moved to the couch and opened my email. At the top was a flagged message from a federal liaison. Subject: Private Briefing, Strategic Cyber Advisory Circle Location. The White House date, June 12th. Attendees, limited to 8. Invitation only. I didn't smile wide, but I did smile. Some victories don't look like parades, some just look like peace. Because this wasn't revenge, it was revelation.